you are visiting Portugal for the first time this year, make sure you watch this video because in it I'll be sharing all my top tips and must-knows for first-timers. Hi, I'm Christina from happytowander.com, and over the past few years I've been to Portugal several times, and it's honestly one of my favorite countries to visit. So in this video I'll be summarizing all my top must-knows for you so that you can enjoy the country as much as I do. Let's get started with some basic must-knows and travel planning tips. So first things first, where should you go in Portugal? For most first-time visitors, their itinerary is probably going to revolve around the most famous tourist destinations along the coast, so the capital city of Lisbon, the second largest city Porto, and also the region along the south coast known as the Algarve. Now, these places are all truly amazing, but honestly, they're also very popular and very busy. So if you have some extra time or you want to get a bit more off the beaten path, just know that Portugal is made up of 18 different districts, as well as 2 autonomous regions, and there's a bunch of really cool destinations to visit within these areas beyond just the most famous sites. So for instance, there's a ton of really cool and historic cities up in the north of Portugal, as well as inland. There's also beautiful nature in Portugal's first and only national park, and tons of gorgeous islands to explore. So if you have the time, I'd really recommend looking beyond just Lisbon, Porto, and the Algarve, and also adding a few more offbeat places to your itinerary as well. For a full list of recommendations, be sure to check the written version of this guide, which has a lot more tips. Now, the most flexible way to get around and potentially explore some of these more off the beaten path places is, of course, by renting a car. Especially if you're going to be in the Algarve region, having a car is really handy to be able to check out some more offbeat beaches that are maybe less crowded. The flip side of this, though, is that driving in Portugal is not really for the faint of heart. Now, there's a few different reasons for this. The first one is that Portugal is notoriously toll heavy on their motorways, so those costs do add up quite a bit. The second is that Portuguese drivers are known to be in a league of their own, so I wouldn't really attempt this unless you're a very, very confident driver. If you are mainly going just from city to city though, public transport is more than enough to help you get from place to place without a car. That said, if you're planning on booking some of the high-speed trains, like the really popular route between Lisbon and Porto, then I'd really recommend booking those tickets in advance because they do sell out. And for shorter distances, there are of course taxis and Ubers, which I found to be really affordable. Now, in terms of arriving in Portugal, there are 3 main international airports, the one in Lisbon, the one in Porto, and the one in Faro. If you're planning on visiting multiple destinations, what I might actually recommend is flying into one airport and then out of another. And this is just because Portugal may be a small country, but it does still take some time to get around. And so anything you can do to avoid doubling back is definitely more time spent on the beach or exploring the city or eating these delicious pastries. In the past, for instance, what I've done is I've flown into Porto and then over the next 10 days made my way down to Lisbon and then down to the Algarve and then flew out of the Faro airport. This I thought was a really great way to do it. And it was really affordable as well because actually all of these airports are really well serviced by budget airlines like Wizz Air and Ryanair. So if you're planning a big Europe trip and you're maybe visiting other countries beyond just Portugal, a good idea might be to look into whether or not it's cheaper to fly into a different country and then catching a budget airline into Portugal. Oftentimes this can save you a ton of money. Another way that you can save money is looking into the TAP Portugal stopover program. So TAP Portugal is an airline that flies, of course, to Portugal, but they offer this really cool program where you can schedule a stopover in either Lisbon or Porto up to 10 nights. So this means you can visit 2 destinations for the price of 1, which is really great. Now, as for when to travel to Portugal, a really good rule of thumb is to just avoid July and August. This is obviously going to be peak season, and not only that, this is when Portugal is at its hottest, so I wouldn't really recommend traveling during these times. I would also try to avoid major school holidays like Easter because this is a really popular time for Europeans to be traveling in Portugal just because it's a very popular family-friendly destination. Now, I don't know if it's just bad luck, but in the past I've been to Portugal both in March and in April, and I found both these times to be incredibly rainy. So if you're trying to make sure that you're getting good weather and still avoiding the crowds, maybe June or September would be a better time to visit. And on that note, I really don't want you to underestimate just how busy it can get in Portugal, even in shoulder season. And so for a lot of North Americans, they think that Portugal is this up and coming destination, but the truth is Portugal has been a fan favorite among European travelers for a really long time. So even if you're visiting during the shoulder season or the off season, you can still expect it to be relatively crowded with European travelers. This is why I would strongly recommend booking a few of the most popular day trip destinations as overnight trips. Because especially for places like Sintra, for instance, oftentimes what people will do is they'll take a day trip from Lisbon, and what ends up happening is during the day, all those day trippers just flock into the city and it makes it absolutely impossible to enjoy the place without crowds. In contrast, if you stay overnight, then you can actually enjoy the places before the day trippers get there and also after they leave. And this is what we did when we visited Sintra, and I honestly wouldn't have had it any other way. We were able to see some of the most popular sites without all the crowds, and so I would highly recommend you do that. And of course, you can apply the same logic to other popular day trip destinations as well. All right, now let's move on to a few culture and etiquette tips for Portugal. First things first, you should know that English isn't as widely spoken in Portugal as it is in other European countries, especially among older residents. If you're in a larger city, you'll probably be fine. Just know that when you start venturing out into smaller towns or villages, you might need to use Google Translate to get around. That said, it is still polite to at least learn how to say hello and thank you. To say hello in Portuguese, it's hola, but it's honestly a lot more common to greet according to the time of day. So if you want to say good morning, you say bom dia. If you want to say good afternoon, you say boa tarde. And if you want to say good night, you say boa noite. With thank you, it's important to know that this phrase is actually gendered in Portuguese. So the way that you say it actually depends on whether you're a woman or a man. So if you're a man, you'd say obrigado. If you're a woman, you'd say obrigada. Like with any language, there's a lot of different regional variations and accents as well, but with Portuguese in particular, one difference that you should pay attention to is the difference between European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese, because the pronunciation actually is quite different. So if you're looking to brush up on your Portuguese before your trip, make sure you're watching videos about European Portuguese above all else so that you can nail the pronunciation. On a related note, it goes without saying that Spanish and Portuguese are not the same language, so don't go to Portugal and speak Spanish and assume that people are going to understand what you're saying. Although there are similarities with the languages and you will be somewhat understood, it's still kind of rude because it's not the same language, so definitely don't just start speaking Spanish at people. Now, if you have the time, I definitely recommend brushing up on the pronunciation of the different places that you're going to be visiting in Portugal, just in case you have to ask for directions. I know that these days there's a lot of Anglified names when it comes to Portuguese places. So for instance, we say Lisbon, we don't say Lisboa, but when you're asking for directions, it can be really important to kind of get the pronunciation as close as possible, because otherwise, even if they speak English, they might not know what you're talking about because they're really used to hearing just the Portuguese names of places. So if you can, make sure you watch at least a video or something that teaches you how to say place names, because trust me, a lot of them aren't pronounced like how they're spelled. All right, now let's discuss some tips for sightseeing and attractions. First things first, know that you are going to be walking uphill a lot. Portugal is incredibly hilly, especially in big cities like Lisbon and Porto. There are so many hills, so you're really going to get quite the leg workout when you're sightseeing. Another important thing to note is that these cobblestone streets are shockingly slippery, especially when it rains, so make sure you bring really good shoes because you are not ready for these streets. Now, if you plan to visit a lot of different museums and attractions, one thing to be mindful of is you can buy these different city cards, which can save you a lot of money. So I know Lisbon and Porto both have these. You essentially pay one set price, and then you get unlimited public transport as well as admission to most of the popular tourist destinations and attractions. Bear in mind, this isn't going to be good value for everyone. You should only really consider it if you're super into museums and attractions, but it's really easy to crunch the numbers and see whether or not it's going to be worth it. Now, lastly, I want to say beware of free museum days, because there's a lot of travel guides out there that talk about how the first Sunday of every month in Portugal is a free museum day. And while this is partially true, actually, when you look at the fine print for a lot of these museums, what they'll specify is that this offer is only valid for Portuguese citizens or residents. So if you're not from Portugal, a lot of the time this offer doesn't apply to you. So before you head out, make sure you double check on the official website so that you're not set up for disappointment. All right, now let's talk about Portuguese food and drink. My first recommendation is to try vinho verde. This is green wine, but don't worry, it's not actually dyed green or anything like that. That name just refers to the fact that the grapes aren't actually aged or matured, so you get this really delicious, mildly fizzy, super crisp and refreshing wine. It's a perfect wine to be drinking when you're out on a sunny terrace, so make sure you try it first thing when you arrive because you're gonna be drinking that for the rest of your vacation. Now, on the topic of wine, if you find yourself wanting to try that famous Portuguese port wine, you should know that this is more of a dessert wine or a wine that's enjoyed on its own. It's not one that you would order for having with a meal. Food-wise, Portuguese cuisine is super hearty and delicious. There's a lot of different regional specialties that you can enjoy depending on where you go. Of course, if you're traveling along the coast, fresh seafood is a must. The seafood in Portugal is absolutely unreal. And one of their main specialties is bacalhau, which is codfish, and they literally have hundreds of ways that they prepare it. One of my personal favorites is pastéis de bacalhau, which are these cod fritters that are made up of mashed potato and cod and then deep fried to golden perfection. Super good. You should definitely try it on your trip. Now in Porto, a very gluttonous must-try is a sandwich known as a francesinha. It's basically a sandwich that's made with this thick bread and it's stuffed with all kinds of meat and cheese and then covered with more melted cheese and mixed with a spicy sauce and usually with a fried egg on top. Yeah, it's really heavy. It's not for everyone, but it's definitely for me and it's super delicious. Now on that note, I've noticed that Portugal really crushes it on the sandwich front. So if you're looking for a really quick lunch to go, make sure you grab a sandwich because there are tons of different regional specialties when it comes to sandwiches. A really popular one is called bifana, which is a pork sandwich, and they have it all over. They prepare it in different ways. It's super delicious and a really good lunch on the go. Now, a specialty of Belém and Lisbon is the pastel de nata. I'm sure you've heard of these before. If not, your life is absolutely about to change. It's basically this egg custard pastry that's wrapped up in this really crispy crust, and it's just the most delicious heavenly bite in the world. Be sure to grab these on your first day because you're going to want to eat as many of these as humanly possible. In terms of dining out, there are a few things that you need to know. First off, Portuguese people tend to dine later than we do in North America, so it's not uncommon for dinner time to be like 8 or 9 p.m. Also, meals tend to last longer there, so be sure to kick back, relax, and kind of enjoy the slower pace. Another must-know is to not expect continuous service at a lot of the smaller, more local restaurants, because a lot of the time what they'll do is they'll either close the kitchen or close completely in between the different meal times, so like from 3 to 7 p.m. So during this time, often if you go into a restaurant and it's still open, the kitchen staff won't be there, so you'll only be able to buy a few small snacks. That said, in larger cities, you probably won't be starving to death because there's gonna be restaurants that are open in those times in between, but just know that often these are restaurants that are a little bit more catering to the tourist crowd. Another important must-know is that when you sit down at a restaurant, oftentimes they'll bring out things like bread, butter, olives, little snacks. These will come at an additional charge that they charge per person, and don't think of it as a scam. A lot of people feel scammed when this happens to them, but it's just kind of a cultural difference in terms of how they charge for different parts of your meal. So if you're not sure if you want to commit to tasting those snacks on the table, what you can do is you can say no thank you, and then they'll take them away, or you can check the menu first. Oftentimes they'll list the price on the menu itself, and then you can kind of decide if it's going to be worth it. Now lastly, tips aren't as expected in Portugal as they are in North America, but if you want to tip for good service, usually 10% or rounding up is more than enough. Now let's tackle some final tips for when you arrive in Portugal. The first is to bring cash. So while a lot of places will take card these days, cash is still king in Portugal for the most part, and not just any kind of cash. Make sure you're carrying bills that are in smaller denominations because a lot of smaller restaurants and cafes are not going to give you change. They don't love giving change, so if you can keep things to like 10 euro bills or less, that would be ideal. Another thing is to not bring out too much cash with you at once because unfortunately pickpockets are definitely a thing, so just make sure that you don't bring out more cash than you can stand to lose. On that note, definitely be extra vigilant when you're in touristy or busier places when you're traveling around Portugal, like train stations or main squares. Unfortunately, I've only been pickpocketed twice in my entire life, and one of them was in Lisbon, so just be careful because these pickpockets can be very crafty. I do have a full video about how to avoid pickpockets in Europe if you want to give that a watch. That kind of goes more in depth with the different techniques that they tend to use, but just overall, try to keep your distance from people and you'll be fine. Another thing to be mindful of is opening time. So as I mentioned before, people in Portugal tend to eat later, and also shops and restaurants will open and close later as well. So oftentimes supermarkets won't be open until like 8 a.m. and they won't close until like 9 or 10 p.m. So just be sure to adjust your schedule accordingly. Last but not least, a very important tip is even if you're visiting in the heat of summer, make sure you bring something warm to wear in the evenings because trust me, that Portuguese wind, especially along the coast, is no joke, and it can get super frigid at night, even in the heat of summer. All right, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that list of tips, and as usual, if you have any more to add or if you have any questions, be sure to leave a comment below. And for more practical travel videos just like this one, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys next week. Bye!